need one here.
Good. We're gonna start. All right. Give the camera just a moment in the back. Good. Coach, are you ready?
How's everybody doing today?
Good. How are you?
All right, let it rip.
Question for Coach?
That situation coming along.
Yeah, feel great about the body of work of that group. Really excited about Graham, his experience, the things that he brings to our team. He certainly caused the rest of the room to elevate their play. I thought Jack had a really good spring, and Max is a really good young player. So we actually start work today with the team, and those guys, an important summer in front of them. I know they're looking forward to it.
Billy, Coach Drenkwitz was just joking. He's a history teacher, and he doesn't know the did you hear the comment?
No.
He doesn't know the 13 colonies agreed on what to do against the British. You guys can't agree on stuff. The 8 or 9 game, how vigorous a debate do you expect that to be? And can you just kind of evaluate both sides, please?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a ton of variables here relative to revenue created, relative to the metric of strength of schedule, relative to the playoff. I think for me, that's probably the most critical factor is, you know, how is the college football playoff gonna view strength of schedule, right? Relative to the metrics that will contribute to that large bids. I think that's gonna be, to me, I think one of the critical factors here.
Do you think there's going to be a lot of debate on this? Or do you think people are starting to tack toward your view? Because you're saying,
First, one thing I know, there'll be quite a
right?
bit of debate about it. I can promise you that. There will be quite a bit of debate about it. And ultimately, I think it's one thing about the SEC, we're going to lead from the front. I think we've got great leadership. I think they've done a great job exhausting all options relative to the research that's went into it. And this league's got a history of making the right decision. That's the reason why the SEC is what it is today. I think there's been some great decisions in the past, and I think the league will make the right decision.
How much conversation is there in the room about what's best for the sport as a whole?
Yeah, quite a bit. I think that David Cutcliffe has been a good addition, you know, in terms of his input, his background, his working relationship with all the coaches. I do think that this league in particular, and the veterans that we have in the room, the wisdom that we have in the room, I think there's quite a bit of insight and discussion about the future of the game as well.
Has Cutcliffe talked to you guys just on every issue, but schedule also?
Yeah, I think just more general counsel. There's conversation all throughout the year. Different times of the year, it's a little bit more intense than others, but anticipating when we are going to get together, what the issues are going to be, so that you can organize your thoughts and be prepared. But I think it's been good. It's been a positive.
Billy, how much discussion is there about recruiting calendar and some of the issues that are around it right now?
Yeah, it's a ton of discussion, and I think that it's getting ready to change quite a bit relative to November, December, January with the 12-team playoff. I think there's been discussion about changes relative to the portal in the past, and now, okay, we got to get that right, but all that's going to change relative to the 12-team playoff. So I think we'll be discussing both this year and then 24 and years going forward as well.
As a head coach, how hectic is that November, December period for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's all relative. You know, I mean, I think each institution's got its battles depending on where you're at relative to your program. Year 1, year 2, year 8's probably a lot simpler than year 1, if that makes sense. But you know, it's part of the evolution, and I think for us, with the portal and NIL, I mean, it's been adapt, it's been evolve. These are areas where there's no blueprint, right? There's no manual, there's no history. So I think that's probably been the biggest challenge, is the things that we were comfortable with, that we understood before. Now we've thrown in a new set of variables and a layer of work, you know, for your staff. That's the biggest challenge.
Billy, how important is it for a school and a collective to be on the same page?
Well, I think it's very important. More importantly, the administration, right? I think there's gotta be some checks and balances in place. And I think each institution in our league and each state law is a little bit different from an oversight perspective. So we're all playing the same game, but we got different set of rules in some regards. And that presents some challenges, but I mean, I think we're educated enough at this point. There's a little uncertainty standing up here a year ago. I think we're a little bit further along. I think we're headed down the path of maybe some type of federal oversight. But ultimately, we need parameters, we need guidelines, we need some guardrails here, and try to create some parity relative to each team's product, right? And I think that ultimately that's the goal.
Billy,
When you
to
talk
follow
about-
up on, to follow up on that, what's been the practical impact from where you sit, from Florida changing its NIL law here a couple months ago?
Yeah, a little bit better communication and collaboration. I do think also the financial literacy emphasis, which I think is a good, healthy practice. You know, I think that's the big issue in my opinion is, okay, players are getting compensated, but what are we doing for the player, right, to create infrastructure? You know, those things that we all screwed up when we were 25, 26, 27 right out of college, right? So these guys, their clock is starting earlier. What can we do as an organization and a league maybe to create some education and put these guys in position, right? We know the research that the NFL does, we know the issues that there are out there, right? We need to put some things in place to help guide the player in the right direction from a financial standpoint.
Speaking of guardrails, maybe to some extent oversight, I think it's fair to say there's a decent amount of angst among coaches when it comes to tampering. Is that an issue you guys expect to debate? And do you see a path forward where it becomes a little bit more palatable, I think is the word?
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is a cutthroat business, right? It's, you know, the most competitive, one of the most competitive dynamics that exist. There's no doubt tampering's real. I do think that we, you know, the intra-conference transfer rule, you know, we gotta deal with that. The people in this room today, we just gotta deal with them one time a year instead of two. But it's real, and it's an issue, and I think that until there's something done about it, I think that you'll continue to see it.
Do you like that interconference rule, or do you see that becoming a disadvantage? Like there was the grad transfer rule in the SEC for the longest time.
Yeah, I can see both sides of the spectrum. You know, I think depending on where your program is at, right, and your roster is at, you know, year to year that's gonna be a little bit different, right? You may have an opinion in year one that is completely different in year four, right, if that makes sense. So I think the stability of your roster, the depth of your roster obviously directly affects your opinion on that rule. So I can see both sides.
How do you get your arms around the tampering part? Because it seems like it's pretty easy to use third parties and coaches and stuff like that to be able to say, have that plausible deniability, like, well, I didn't call that kid and tell him to go to the portal,
Yeah,
whatever, but
I mean,
what's happening?
I think that it's, you know, ultimately it's happening, right? So I think it puts an importance on the culture within your building, the experience that your player has, right? All facets of the player experience are important. And I think in the evaluation process, it becomes even more important. You know, the kid, who is his circle of influence, right? What's the family dynamic? I think there's an evaluation in the initial part of the recruitment that becomes even more important. Why is the player coming to the University of Florida, right? What's the motivation? All those things are gonna be even more important in today's dynamic.
Would you like to see players become employees on a big picture sense and also as a roster management tool, a tampering, device to stop that? You know, where do you stand on that sort of big picture issue?
Yeah, I mean, I think we have the number of variables that, you know, contribute to this issue we have relative to employee law, antitrust law, the difference in state law, right? I mean, so regardless of my opinion, I mean, we have a number of variables that contribute to this issue, right? Federal oversight is ultimately the answer to the question, right? Now, who's gonna do that, right? Is it our government? Is it college football playoff? Is it one of our leagues? Is it the SEC, right? At some point, I think you're gonna see some frustration with all involved, and somebody's gonna make a decision that ultimately puts those things in place that you're describing.
College football, college athletics as a whole, seems to becoming more professionalized, almost becoming NFL-like. It's become a transactional model, whether we're talking about NIL, money, and now, you know, transfer portal and everything. Are we moving away too far from the collegiate model that you were around in the business? And do you think we should have a course correction of any sort? And how do we do that?
You know, for me, I think I'm always, the challenge is to remind yourself of your purpose, right? Why you got into the profession, keep in perspective about, you know, your original intent. Why did you want to be a coach, right? And the type of place that you want to have, right? So I think the way we put together our organization is all about development. It's the person, the student, and the player. And I do think that in the recruiting process, that's the approach, right? And I think you tend to attract someone who's about those things, right? Who's about the development as a person, right? Teaching a set of values, prioritizing the education, realizing that at some point the game's going away, right? And this window of time that the player has in his life, let's back up and see this thing from a big picture standpoint. What's the game about? What's college athletics about? If we can keep that perspective, I think we got a chance to keep our game intact.
Is it more
Time
difficult?
for a few more guys.
What are the dominant two questions now from a recruit with all these changes in college football?
I mean, I don't think it's much different. I think we just added a few variables, right? I think NIL being the main one, right? So they're still evaluating your program. You're still putting your program together the same ways. You just added a variable, right, on the recruitment side. And I think the portal has created two cycles of work from the evaluation and recruitment side. You know, those are the two main workloads that have been added to our shelf. So ultimately, I think we're selling the same things. We just got another variable that contributes to the decision.
Billy, are you concerned in any way where we're headed when it comes to gambling in college athletics right now? You know, I know you can only say so much, and in the state of Florida, there's some things that are legal, some things that aren't, online betting, but when these players go home or talk with others, how do you try to control that in your locker room?
You know, I think that we've got good checks and balances in place, not only from the league, but also within our institution. You know, it's made the game more popular, right? So I think there's pros and cons here, right? So I think the big thing is you got to have great checks and balances in place. You got to educate your players and try to prevent some of these things from happening.
Billy, do you think more coaches should call out other programs that tamper like Pat Narduzzi did? Do you think we'll see that, and is that an effective way of controlling it?
Well, I mean, what's come of that? You know, that would be my question, right? So, you know, ultimately, I think to each his own, right? We all got an approach that we've chose to take. We're going to control what we control at the University of Florida. That's our player experience. That's our evaluation process, our recruitment process, and try to position our team in the best position.
Time for one more, guys. Ready?
Billy, there's been a lot of talk about Florida, Georgia, keeping it in Jacksonville, home and home. Long term, what is your preference when it comes to that game?
Well, we're excited that the game's going to be in Jacksonville. The announcement this week, 3 more years. No, reality is this is beneficial for both sides of the equation. It's good for the city of Jacksonville as well. I think there's some, you know, economics that directly affect this decision, right? Ultimately, that's what it comes down to, right? So there's advantages to being able to play at home and home, right? But there's also advantages to playing the game in Jacksonville. So I think as we go forward, you know, we got 3 more years of the current dynamic. we're gonna focus on that.
Billy, do you favor 9 games? So you can get 4 and 4 home and away, since you have a neutral site game?
Yeah, I think it's all about the metric. To me, it's all about the college football playoff, right? Is the strength of schedule gonna be weighed, you know, in a fashion that would benefit the SEC, right, to play 9 games? And I think each league in our team, relative to their traditional rival, is that team in the league, is it not, right? How, you know, I think there's some issues there as well. So, you know, I think 24 is gonna be unique in a lot of regards for the SEC, but let's not forget the most monumental change is gonna be the 12-team college football playoff, right? So how do these decisions affect our ability to ultimately get into the tournament?
So is it better to go to 9 or stay at 8?
Depends on
First strength
how,
of schedule.
we don't necessarily know how the playoff is gonna weigh the strength of schedule metric. Does that make sense?
All right. Thank you, Coach.
All right,
Thanks,
thank you guys.
Well, that was-